Alright, my two remaining viewers, today I am going to be ranking every 2022 movie that I saw. Yes, this is way overdue. I was originally going to do this at the beginning of the year, and I just never got round to it because if you've been around for a while, you'd know that I rarely ever do something at the time that I intend on doing it. But yeah, I really want to do this now, so enough chatter, let's get ranking. Alright, the worst movie I saw from the year 2022 was the movie Thor God of Thunder. And this is no surprise, the movie is made by Asylum. They have a reputation for making extremely bad movies, and yeah, this is no different. It is exactly what you expect from an Asylum film. It came out the same year as a popular movie, which is, you know, similar in its concept, and that movie is Thor Love and Thunder, which, by the way, spoiler alerts for this video, but Thor Love and Thunder won't be very high on the list either. I also thought that was a very bad movie, and the fact that this movie was worse is quite impressive because, yeah, Thor Love and Thunder, I really don't like the movie, and Thor God of Thunder almost makes it look like a masterpiece. Yeah, when I first watched this movie, I was confident that it would be my least favorite film of the year, but then I did obviously watch an Asylum film, and they typically are the worst films ever. So this movie got kind of lucky, I guess, for not being in the bottom spot. But yeah, it's still pretty terrible. Apart from a few cool shots like the one on your screen right now and some good looking gore, there's really nothing to praise about this movie. It's just really bad. It's a direct sequel to the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, ignoring every other movie that came after the original 1973 film. And it's just an insult to that movie. It tries to, like, be sort of like a love letter to fans by bringing back the original protagonist, but she does absolutely nothing in the movie. Take her out, and the story remains the same. They saw the popularity with the Blumhouse Halloween films, which brought back Jamie Lee Curtis as fuck. I can't remember her name, but yeah, those movies were successful, even though they were also pretty shit. They saw an opportunity to bring back the old protagonist from the first Texas Chainsaw movie, but they didn't actually know what to do with her character, so she's just in it for like a couple minutes, and then pretty sure she dies. Spoiler alert, I don't really remember. I don't care about the movie. I can't believe a sequel to a masterpiece like the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre has the line, "Try anything and you're cancelled, bro," unironically. The movie is absolutely ridiculous. I can't believe my old friend actually recommended it to me and told me it was good. We are not even friends anymore. Thank God for that, because he has awful taste in film. Oh, by the way, something I just found out when I was looking for images of Sally from the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie, I discovered that the actress they used for Sally in the Netflix movie from 2022 isn't even the same actress from the original Texas Chainsaw movie. So they don't even have that same effect as the Blumhouse Halloween films because they actually had the same actress from the older movies. So I don't even know why they bothered with this. Speaking of the Blumhouse Halloween films, in 15th place we have Halloween Ends. And I already mentioned that I don't like any of the Blumhouse Halloween movies. I thought the first one was just fine, but nothing that I really care about. The second one was pretty bad, but Halloween Ends from 2022 is the worst of the three, easily. I do not know how they thought this script was okay, but it is absolutely ridiculous. It's supposed to be the finale, like the big endgame for the Halloween franchise, and both Michael Myers and Jamie Lee Curtis are hardly even in the movie. They are like side characters, And literally, they're the only two people on the main poster. They're back to back. It's the big good versus evil fight, and they're hardly even in the movie. The film mainly focuses on a copycat killer and Laurie Strode's granddaughter. Why? I don't know. They wanted to do a message about violence being blamed on other people. I don't know. It's just really stupid. Like, I guess this could work for, like, a movie in the middle of the Halloween franchise. Like, yeah, the movie still would have been bad, but it wouldn't have been as bad. But for a finale, it's just ridiculous and underwhelming. Like, everyone came to this movie for the final showdown between Laurie Strode and Michael Myers. That's what the movie was advertising for it to be. And it was nothing like that. It was only that kind of movie for the final 10 minutes. It's ridiculous. I hate this movie. In 14th place, we have Thor: Love and Thunder. Yeah, this is what kind of killed the MCU for me. I used to follow the Marvel Cinematic Universe religiously. Every time they brought a movie out, I was always watching it. As soon as it came out on digital and DVD, I had all the MCU DVDs, and I'd often watch the new releases in cinemas. But man, this movie really, yeah, it impacted the MCU negatively, at least for me. I just don't care about the franchise that much anymore. I don't believe in it as much as I used to, because this movie embodies everything that is wrong with today's MCU. They seem to value comedy over actual decent characters and decent storytelling. I mean, this movie spends so much time focusing on dumb shit like screaming goats and Thor being just a complete buffoon, that the whole side plot or subplot, whatever, about Jane Foster's cancer just gets no emotional reaction out of me, because why should it? The movie didn't want me to take the rest of it seriously, so why should I take this little part about Jane Foster's cancer seriously? And yeah, movies that mix comedy and drama can work, but there's got to be a balance. You can't just make the movie 95% kiddie, childish jokes, and then the other 5% being about cancer and starvation and children dying because of an unfit climate for life. You know, it is pretty stupid. And yeah, very cringe. This is the worst MCU movie for me. It's because of this movie that I'm just not following any new Marvel Studios releases. Like, yeah, there'll be the odd project that I check out. Like, I watched Guardians of the Galaxy 3 in cinemas and I loved it. But the only movies now that I can see myself seeing in cinemas are films like Fantastic Four, Spider-Man 4, and the next couple Avengers movies. Anything else I really don't care about. Yeah, how unfortunate. Especially since Thor Ragnarok was actually a pretty good movie. It was actually funny, for starters, and it balanced out the humour and drama enough for me to actually care about what was going on. Like, yeah, there were a couple times where there was some tonal whiplash, but apart from that, it was solid. But this movie, I fucking hate it. They wasted Christian Bale's talent, which is a shame because, you know, he actually did have one or two good scenes. Like, that black and white part of the movie was actually pretty cool. But yeah, everything else, shit. Now for the 13th spot, we have probably the biggest reason for why I wanted to make this video in the first place. Blonde. The biggest disappointment of 2022. If you're someone who talks to me frequently, which I'm going to be honest is not a lot of people, you would know that I was very excited for Blonde when I found out about its existence. I genuinely believed it was going to be one of the best movies ever. And then it came out, and all the reviews were very negative, calling it disgusting, which kind of put me off watching it. So I ended up only watching it 2 months after its release instead of watching it the day it released like I originally planned. And yeah, the reviews were right. This movie is disgusting. I've expressed a lot of hatred towards this movie in real life and on social media. I really, really do not like it, but let's just talk about the positives first because there are some. I will admit I do sometimes exaggerate when I talk about this movie. I make it out like it's one of the worst things ever made, and it is far from that because, like I said, there are quite a few good things in this movie that I really appreciate. For one, Ana de Armas gives a great performance, even though I hate the movie. I think she deserved that Oscar nomination. The other thing that I really liked about this movie is I think it had some really nice cinematography. However, the idea of having coloured scenes and black and white scenes in the movie was cool, but utilized very poorly. There was no like thematic reason for the constant switch up between black and white and colour. So it just made you wonder what was the point, and it was just really distracting throughout the whole movie. But other than that, the movie itself looks great. The final compliment I will give this movie is that the recreations of iconic Marilyn Monroe moments that you'll see in films and on very famous photographs, are actually fantastic. I've seen some people complain about how Ana de Armas' mannerisms are not identical to Marilyn's real life mannerisms, and I think people are just being way too picky there. This is one of the rare occasions where I defend the Blonde movie because people set the bar way too high when it came to Ana de Armas' performance. People were genuinely upset because Ana de Armas couldn't perfectly mirror Marilyn Monroe's mannerisms and voice. And it seems that they don't understand that perfectly imitating someone, especially if it's a person you've never met, is literally impossible. It would be very freaky if someone could perfectly imitate another human being, especially if they have never even met that human being. And the only thing they can base their performance on are clips from interviews and films. Sorry about that little rant, but I just really wanted to show some appreciation for Ana de Armas because her performance was not the issue with the film. She did really great in this movie, although her decision to even be in the movie in the first place is a very questionable one because this story is really messed up. And I don't mean that in a way where it's messed up, but there's good intentions behind why it's messed up. It's just simply horrible. This film is supposed to be opposing the exploitation of the female body in the film industry. However, it includes excessive and pointless nudity with Ana de Armas, which totally contradicts the message being presented here, and it shows that the writers had no idea what they were doing with this. Overall, Blonde is very hypocritical and extremely disrespectful to Marilyn Monroe. Now, in 12th place, I have Falling for Christmas. Now, this was a Netflix film that released around November, and the only reason I watched it was because it starred Lindsay Lohan, and I'm pretty sure this was like her first movie in years. It has one Mean Girls reference, which I guess is kind of cool, but the movie overall is very uninspired. It has nothing interesting going on. It is like a million other cheap Christmas movies. And yeah, that's all I really have to say about it. For my 11th spot, I have Samaritan, which is a superhero movie starring Sylvester Stallone. And seeing as superhero movies are the big thing at the moment, it's very hard for them to stand out. And this one definitely doesn't stand out. A lot of superhero movies stand out for being good, and there are also many that stand out for being bad. An example of that is Morbius. And while this one is bad, there isn't really anything bad about it to make it stand out. It's just really uninspired. There's some big twist towards the end of the film, however, it adds absolutely nothing to the story. This is also one of those movies that has an annoying child protagonist that we follow, and sometimes those movies work, but a lot of the times the kids are just annoying, and yeah, this is one of those movies. In 10th place, I have The Grey Man. Now, it's a shame that I don't like this movie, because I should like it. It's directed by the Russo brothers, who have made some of the top tier MCU films, and the movie stars Ryan Gosling and Ana de Armas, and that pairing is a very special pairing. I absolutely love their chemistry in Blade Runner 2049. Chris Evans is also the antagonist, and personally, I really love Chris Evans when he plays a villain. I know he's great as Captain America, but when he's in movies like Scott Pilgrim vs. the World and Knives Out, that's when his acting really shines. But it's just a shame that the movie is so bland and uninspired. In 9th place, I have Not Okay. Now, I really wish I liked this movie because it had a lot of potential. The message in the center is really good, but the execution is not all that great. A large chunk of the movie has this very light-hearted tone, which makes sense because of the protagonist's confident attitude. But a lot of the humor and dialogue is so childish and annoying, which makes the tonal shift in the third act really jarring. Either the first two acts should have toned down the silliness, or the third act should have been less dramatic. Although there are a lot of good ideas put into this movie, the finished product is pretty frustrating. I have The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent in 8th place, which is the most recent movie that I watched from 2022, because I only watched it a couple of months ago, and I don't dislike it, but I don't really like it either. It's very forgettable. The storyline is very basic. It's something you've seen a million times, except they add in a bunch of Nicolas Cage references in there, which were kind of cool, and the scenes involving conversations about films in general were pretty fun. But apart from that, didn't really care about anything going on in here. Also, didn't really like the way it concluded. Okay, so for my 7th spot on this ranking, there is a big leap in quality. We went from mediocre to movies that I think are pretty good, and the movie here in this spot is A24's X, starring Mia Goth, Jenna Ortega, and that one black guy with a big dick. I forgot his name, but it setup is pretty basic, you know, cabin in the woods, some eerie atmosphere. We've seen it before, but it goes in some interesting directions, and I overall love the 1970s aesthetic. I think the soundtrack mixed in with the fashion and the overall set design really helped deliver that 70s vibe. This movie also took a lot of inspiration from the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was released in the 1970s, so obviously that helped with the aesthetic of that decade. And also, the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of my favourite horror films of all time, so that just makes me like X even more. In 6th place, I have Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and it may come as a surprise to some of you that this is so high on the ranking, because in the video where I discussed my channel having some changes, I mentioned that I'm not a big fan of the MCU anymore, especially Marvel Phase 4, and a lot of people don't like Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, so, you know, you might assume that I was included in that group of people because I'm not a huge fan of Marvel Phase 4, but I don't really get the hate for this movie. Like, yeah, it's not perfect, and it's one of Sam Raimi's weakest films. It's clear that he didn't have that much creative control over the script, but man, this movie actually does feel different from all the other MCU movies in terms of its style, and that is mainly thanks to Sam Raimi. I think his directing is the best part of the film. The story itself is decent, but I expected it to be better, considering it's about the multiverse, which is a very interesting concept. But yeah, overall, I enjoyed it. Definitely not one of the best MCU films, but probably one of the best Marvel Phase 4 films. In fifth place, I have Nope, directed by Jordan Peele. And although I haven't seen Us, I believe Jordan Peele is one of the greatest up-and-coming directors. I first watched Jordan Peele's debut film Get Out years after its release, so I'm pretty lucky that I didn't know any important plot details. In fact, I didn't know any plot details at all. So it was just a very thrilling experience watching a movie that I know has a very good reputation and is known to be a modern horror masterpiece without knowing how it's going to unfold. That is just a very suspenseful way to experience a film. Fortunately for me, I was interested in the movie Nope before it was even being promoted. The marketing made it clear that the movie was going to be about some kind of extraterrestrial life form, but audiences were unsure what this extraterrestrial life form would behave and look like. When the movie finally came out and we saw this alien, man, I think some people were actually disappointed, but I personally loved it. If you haven't seen the movie yet, I'm not going to spoil it. I feel like this twist on the idea of an alien is just fantastic. I absolutely love it. It's something you don't see often, and it actually makes a lot of sense for something that is not of this world. It's unexpected and it leaves a lot to the imagination, which I really love. Something else this movie deserves praise for is that a lot of horror movies don't really faze me, even when it comes to sequences that are supposed to distress the audience or disturb them or scare them or whatever. But there are a couple of scenes in this movie that they got stuck in my mind because they were pretty disturbing, and that doesn't happen often. So, well done, Jordan Peele. In fourth place, I have The Northman. Now, I already talked about Jordan Peele being one of the greatest up-and-coming directors, but I probably would give the slight edge to Robert Eggers as being a better up-and-coming director. Maybe that's just because I've seen all of his movies and I haven't seen Jordan Peele's Us yet, so there's just more movies there to look at. But it's also probably because Robert Eggers focuses on a lot of different time periods in his movies, which I really appreciate. I'm not saying I have a problem with Jordan Peele focusing only on modern times, but I prefer the variety, and I think it makes Robert Eggers seem a lot more unique. And for that reason, I do think Robert Eggers is my favourite up-and-coming director. Like more than Ari Aster, Jordan Peele, Damien Chazelle. Yeah, I think he is my favourite, and The Northman does help out with that. It is a very great movie. As you can see, it is in the top 5 of my 2022 list. I think Robert Eggers does a great job at capturing the harshness of the time period. I can't think of any director on the top of my head that can do it quite as well as him. And I feel like that quality of Robert Eggers is more prominent in this movie than it is in The Witcher and The Lighthouse. Don't get me wrong, I love those movies, and The Lighthouse is actually my favourite film from him. But when it comes to displaying hardship in an authentic manner, this movie definitely stands out the most amongst his filmography. In third place, I have Top Gun Maverick. Now, this film was a very pleasant surprise because it actually became one of the most well-received and, in my opinion, one of the best legacy sequels of all time. And we've been getting a lot of legacy sequels recently. It's not the best legacy sequel because it kind of became impossible for any new movies to become the best legacy sequels since a certain sci-fi film starring Ryan Gosling, Harrison Ford and Ana de Armas released in 2017. One of the biggest reasons why I was so surprised at how good this movie ended up being was that I'm not a huge fan of the original Top Gun film. I think it's pretty good. I'd give it a solid 7 out of 10, but I do think it's a little overrated. I do respect it for what it was able to achieve at the time of its making. I understand that a lot of people that are older than me have a lot of nostalgia, and that is very understandable. I myself are nostalgic about certain movies, even if they're not the best thing ever. So movies like Blade Runner 2049 and Terminator Dark Fate had a lot to live up to because the original Terminator and original Blade Runner have aged phenomenally and are still hailed as some of the greatest sci-fi films of all time. But Top Gun is only really highly praised by, the people that were there at the time. But movies like Terminator and Blade Runner are held at a high rating by general people just because they are objectively great films. The point I'm making here is that the legacy sequels to Blade Runner and Terminator had a lot of pressure on them because many people love those movies, whereas the Top Gun fans are, pretty old, let's be real, and the original Top Gun movie's story isn't anything all that special, so the Top Gun sequel did not have that much pressure on it, which is what led me to believe that the movie wasn't going to be anything too impressive besides the special effects and flying scenes or whatever. But yeah, it was not only a really great sequel, but just a really great movie. Honestly, it blew me away, and it is a million times better than the original film, and anyone who tells you otherwise is biased or 60 years old and can't let the old times just go, because this movie is better and my opinion is always right. The movie in second place is Matt Reeves' The Batman. Now, when this film came out and I knew people who watched it, I heard a lot of mixed opinions from people. Some people really loving it, some people saying it's too long and it's boring, but I completely disagree. I've seen the movie twice now, once in the cinemas and once at home, and both times the runtime flies by. I do never get bored watching this movie, and this is probably one of my hottest takes, but I honestly like this more than Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, which might be crazy to some people because a lot of people consider The Dark Knight to be the best comic book film of all time and in general just one of the greatest films of all time. But I just think Matt Reeves captures the Batman character and vibe a lot better than Christopher Nolan does. I love Christopher Nolan as a director, and I even love his Batman movies a lot, but they don't really have that Gotham City that you look for in a Batman movie. I'd say Christian Bale plays a better Bruce Wayne than a Batman. But Robert Pattinson's the opposite. He plays a better Batman than a Bruce Wayne, but I think that was kind of the point in this movie, and his Bruce Wayne will develop over time. Also, this movie is probably the first Batman movie to actually explore the detective aspect of the character. Yeah, a lot of other different Batman movies touch on his detective side, but this movie dives straight in there, and I really appreciate that because that is a side we do not see enough of, and I love detective stories. And also, I really love the antagonist, the Riddler. I think it's a really great adaptation of the character. He's no Heath Ledger's Joker when it comes to great live-action Batman villains, but he's still up there as one of the best we've gotten. Paul Dano did a really good job. I think he was perfectly cast. Yeah, I really love the movie. My favourite movie of 2022 is Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. Well, in my country it came out in 2023, but most people recognise it as a 2022 movie. So we're just going to throw it in here as my favourite film of 2022. Now, I had a very complicated relationship with this movie in the build-up to its release. Originally, the movie was titled Puss in Boots: 9 Lives and 40 Thieves, and I thought, okay, interesting, I'm looking forward to seeing it. By the way, I wasn't a huge fan of the original movie. I don't think it's terrible, but just kind of mediocre, and we knew a sequel was coming, but it had been like more than a decade, and we were only getting little bits of news, and then later we found out that the title actually got changed to The Last Wish, and in my mind I thought, wow, 10 years and they still don't know what they're doing with this movie. It seems like they just have no idea what direction to go in with the Puss in Boots character and story, and the final result is going to be a huge mess. So I was really worried I'd lost hope for the movie, even though I'd previously been excited for it, because I'm a huge fan of the Shrek universe, and this would be sort of like a revival to that franchise. And then we started to get our first looks at the movie. I remember on Instagram they were posting like just little seconds of footage of Puss in Boots in build up to the new trailer that was coming out. And just from those small seconds of footage, I did not really like the new animation style. And even when the trailer released for the movie, I still wasn't a huge fan. And that's not because I thought it looked bad, I just thought it was a downgrade because the Shrek animation style was really cool and unique because it kind of looked realistic, but not in an uncanny valley way. It actually looked really great. I mean, can you believe that this was an animated cat back in 2004? Not only did the original Shrek franchise's animation look great, but I also just personally loved it and had a nostalgic connection to it. It's what I grew up with, and Shrek was just my thing when I was a kid, and it still is my thing. So yeah, I was not crazy about the animation change for Puss in Boots 2 because, you know, it's a sequel to a Shrek spin-off. So it also implies that the Shrek franchise will look that way going forward. But as time went on, the animation did start to grow on me, and by the time I actually watched the movie in theaters, I was completely down for it. I was into it. I loved it. It was super unique. It definitely took inspiration from Spider-Verse because that movie was also groundbreaking in the animation area of the film industry and cinema as a whole, or, you know, whatever. And yeah, I just really, really loved it. It was a really great look for the movie. And I thought it was a really nice way of making the Puss in Boots story stand out from Shrek. But at the same time, I wouldn't mind if Shrek 5 actually has the same animation style. I do think I would prefer if they kept the original look, but if they do have the Puss in Boots 2 style, then I honestly will not mind. Shrek 5 is set to release in 2025, as we have learned quite recently, and I cannot wait. Puss in Boots 2 did clearly imply that we are getting more Shrek content in the future, and as long as they keep making quality bangers like Puss in Boots 2, then I'm gonna be eating it all up. So yeah, that is my ranking of all the 2022 films I saw. Took me long enough. Yeah, I started working on this video very early on this year actually, and it was set to be complete and uploaded in August, and it's now November. That is a fucking 3 month delay. That is pretty wild, but I actually do have an excuse. I have been making videos, just not for YouTube. I've been making them for college because I do media studies now and have to make adverts and documentaries to actually, you know, be accepted in college. You know what I mean. But yeah, I'll probably do this again next year for 2023 films. Have a good day or night whenever you're watching. Just have a good time. Unless you're a terrible person, then maybe you don't deserve a good time, you know? I'm just yapping. Goodbye.